I still remember the crunch of their designer winter boots on my snowy driveway that February morning. Patricia Kelman, president of the Cedar Pine Property Association, marched up to my cabin like she owned the place, which was ironic since that's exactly what she was trying to claim. Behind her trailed two board members, Douglas Harmon and Veronica Slade, both clutching folders and wearing expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. My name is Miles Harker and I'm a wildlife photographer who bought this cabin in Cedar Pine Ridge specifically to escape the suburban nonsense I'd left behind. The cabin sits on 5 acres of pristine mountain property, complete with a creek that attracts elk in the summer and provides the perfect backdrop for my work. I'd purchased it outright 6 years ago before anyone even thought about forming an HOA in this area. The Cedar Pine Property Association had formed just 18 months earlier after a developer built a cluster of vacation homes about 2 miles down the mountain. Patricia, who owned one of those new homes, had immediately appointed herself president and set about creating what she called community standards for the entire ridge. She wore business suits to every meeting, even when the meetings were held at the ski lodge, and carried a leather-bound binder that she treated like it was handed down from Mount Si. The first sign of trouble came when I received a letter demanding $900 in retroactive association dues. The letter claimed that all properties within a 5 m radius of the Cedar Pine development were automatically part of the HOA and subject to its rules. I laughed and tossed it in the recycling bin. My property deed clearly showed I owned the land free and clear with no HOA restrictions whatsoever. But Patricia didn't give up easily. Over the next 3 months, I received increasingly aggressive letters. First, they claimed my cabin violated architectural standards because I hadn't submitted plans for approval. Then, they said my wildlife photography blind near the creek was an unauthorized structure. Finally, they started claiming that my deed was somehow invalid because it hadn't been registered with the association. Each letter threatened fines, liens, and legal action if I didn't comply immediately. I consulted with my attorney, Richard Pembroke, who confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had absolutely no authority over my property. He sent them a cease and desist letter, which Patricia apparently interpreted as a declaration of war. That's when she decided to take matters into her own hands. On that February morning, I was editing photos in my home office when I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I watched Patricia and her 2 accomplices trudging through the snow toward my front gate. Patricia carried a clipboard and what looked like a manila envelope stuffed with documents. Douglas had a measuring tape for some reason, and Veronica was filming everything on her phone. I met them at my front gate, which clearly displayed private property and no trespassing signs. Patricia didn't even bother with pleasantries. She announced in her most authoritative voice that she was there to collect my property deed and keys. According to her, the HOA board had voted to secure my property until I paid all outstanding dues and fines, which had somehow ballooned to over $5,000. When I laughed and told her to get off my property, she actually tried to push past me through the gate. She said she had HOA authority and waved her manila envelope like it was a search warrant. Douglas chimed in that they had the right to inspect any property in the association while Veronica kept filming and narrating like she was documenting evidence for court. That's when Patricia made her biggest mistake. She declared that if I didn't hand over the deed immediately, she would call association security to forcibly remove me from the premises. She claimed they had already started foreclosure proceedings and that I was technically trespassing on HOA property. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd been expecting something like this. After her letters had become increasingly unhinged, I'd had a long conversation with Sheriff Jim Dalton about the situation. He'd assured me that if they ever showed up on my property making threats or demands, I should call 911 immediately. So, while Patricia continued her rant about community standards and the sacred authority of the HOA board, I calmly pulled out my phone. Patricia actually smirked when she saw me dialing. She probably thought I was calling my lawyer or maybe even capitulating to her demands. Her smirk faded when I said the words Sheriff's Department into the phone. I explained to the dispatcher that 3 people were on my property refusing to leave and attempting to steal my deed and keys. Patricia's face went from smug to confused to worried in the span of about 10 seconds. While we waited for the deputies to arrive, Patricia tried to backtrack. She said they were just there for a friendly discussion about bringing my property into compliance. Douglas suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be, but Patricia grabbed his arm and hissed that they needed to present a united front. Veronica had stopped filming and was furiously typing on her phone, probably trying to Google whether what they were doing was actually legal. The two sheriffs who arrived faster than I expected, their chains crunching on the snowy road. Deputies Walker and Chin stepped out looking mildly amused by the scene. 3 overdressed suburbanites standing in the snow outside a rustic cabin, clutching folders and looking like they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Deputy Walker asked me to explain the situation, which I did, showing him some of the threatening letters Patricia had sent. Then he turned to Patricia and asked for her side of the story. She launched into a rehearsed speech about HOA authority and community standards, waving her manila envelope and insisting that she had every right to be there. She even claimed that I was the one breaking the law by refusing to comply with association rules. Deputy Chin asked the question that sealed their fate. He wanted to know if Patricia had any court order authorizing her to take my property. Patricia hesitated, then admitted she didn't have a court order, but insisted she didn't need one because the HOA board had voted. She actually pulled out a piece of paper from her envelope that showed the board meeting minutes where they'd voted to acquire my property. The deputies exchanged a look that I can only describe as a mixture of disbelief and trying not to laugh. Deputy Walker explained in the slow, patient tone you'd use with a child, that HOA authority only extended to properties actually within the HOA. He pointed out that voting to take someone's property didn't make it legal any more than voting to rob a bank would make that legal. Patricia tried to argue, but Deputy Chin cut her off. He informed all 3 of them that they were under arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted coercion. The look on Patricia's face was priceless. She went from indignant to shocked to panicked in about 2 seconds. Douglas immediately started babbling that this was all Patricia's idea and he was just there as a witness. Veronica tried to claim she was just documenting the incident for the HOA records. The deputies weren't interested in their excuses. They had all 3 turn around and put their hands behind their backs. Patricia protested the entire time they were putting the handcuffs on, insisting that this was a civil matter and they had no right to arrest her. She demanded to speak to the sheriff personally and threatened to sue everyone involved. Douglas just looked defeated, muttering something about how his wife was going to kill him. Veronica started crying. Watching them get marched down my driveway was surreal. Patricia, who'd strutted up like she owned the place, was now doing the shuffle of shame in handcuffs. Her expensive boots slipping on the icy ground. At one point, Douglas actually fell and the deputies had to help him back up. Patricia's carefully styled hair was ruined by the falling snow and her clipboard lay abandoned in my driveway. The deputies loaded them into separate vehicles. Patricia still protesting loudly enough that I could hear her through the closed car door. As they drove away, I noticed Patricia's pen had fallen out of her pocket into the slush. I picked it up. It was a gold-plated Mont Blanc with Patricia Kelman, HOA president, engraved on it. I decided to keep it as a souvenir. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Patricia. The story spread through Cedar Pine Ridge like wildfire. Someone, probably Veronica trying to cover herself, leaked the whole incident to the other HOA members. The emergency board meeting the following week was apparently quite dramatic. Patricia tried to spin the incident as a misunderstanding, but when the other board members learned she'd been arrested and that the HOA could face serious legal liability for her actions, they voted her out immediately. But that was just the beginning of Patricia's troubles. The district attorney charged all 3 with criminal trespassing and attempted extortion. Douglas and Veronica quickly took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Patricia in exchange for probation and community service. Patricia, stubborn to the end, decided to fight the charges. The trial was a disaster for her. My attorney, Richard, testified about the cease and desist letter and Patricia's continued harassment. The deputies testified about her claims of HOA authority to seize private property. But the most damaging testimony came from Douglas and Veronica, who revealed that Patricia had been planning this for weeks and had even researched whether she could hire private security to forcibly evict me. The judge was not amused. Patricia was convicted on all counts. When the sentence was read, Patricia's face went white. 2 years in prison, suspended to 6 months with 3 years probation, $50,000 in fines, and a permanent restraining order keeping her 500 feet away from my property. She actually gasped when the judge read the fine amount, then broke down sobbing when he added that she'd likely face civil lawsuits as